What are your thoughts on what makes a great leader?
So we're born with about 30% of our ability to influence. And that's really what leadership is. It's not about a job title, it's about our ability to influence. But 70% in those skills of influence, we grow and develop into. Now, if we're lucky, we've got great mentors, we've got great role models, we've got a great education. But what I've discovered is a lot of us are just, fumbling around in the dark when it comes to learning how to build influence with people. We have this false idea of what leadership is. We think about it like, hey, if I'm the captain of the football team, if I'm the boss of the team, I'm a leader. But if you've ever worked for a bad boss, you recognize that just because you got the job title doesn't mean you've got the behavior to learn how to influence. So there's key skills.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the From Crisis to Justice podcast. I'm your host, Parag Amin, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Angie Morgan. Angie is an executive coach and New York Times best-selling author. Before that, she served in the military and achieved the rank of captain. Angie, thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for being here today.
I am honored to be here, Prague, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's wonderful to have conversations with business owners, entrepreneurs, people interested in really understanding the landscape that they're entering into. So thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of your transition, can you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from the military into becoming an executive coach and best-selling author?
Yeah, it was an interesting transition indeed. So my last duty station was Marine Corps Base Hawaii, which was fantastic. And when you're stationed there, you don't really want to leave, and you don't want your next duty assignment because nothing gets better than that. And so my time was up. I thought, what do I want to do with my life? I was at the time getting married, and he was living in LA, actually. So I moved to Los Angeles and landed the easiest job in the world. And if you've ever wondered what the easiest job in the world, it's not yours, it was mine. I was working for Pfizer in Beverly Hills selling Viagra in a pharmaceutical sales company. So the Viagra, Beverly Hills, it was not a hard sales career to start off with, a lot of time on my hands. And I kept on thinking during this time, what was different about my Marine Corps experience and the private sector, and what was really pronounced to me was how we talked about the word leadership. In the military was everybody led. We all learned the same leadership principles. We viewed ourselves leaders, even if we didn't have anybody to take care of. But in the private sector, leaders were only managers, and nobody really viewed themselves as a leader. And this was 2004. And I'm like, this is an opportunity. So I started writing on military leadership, started a business with a woman I served with in the Marine Corps. So for the past 20 years, I've been coaching, developing, delivering leadership training events, writing on leadership. And it's just a topic that I'm truly passionate about.
Wow, that's great. So what do you think, what are your thoughts on what makes a great leader?
I think a lot of questions that people have are you born or are you made? And I think the most interesting thing about leadership is that there's a part of us, about 30%, the research shows in identical twin studies where they look at identical twins separated at birth to see this nature-nurture component of leadership. So we're born with about 30% of our ability to influence. And that's really what leadership is. It's not about a job title, it's about our ability to influence. But 70% in those skills of influence, we grow and develop into. Now, if we're lucky, we've got great mentors, we've got great role models, we've got a great education. But what I've discovered in my time teaching and coaching on leadership is a lot of us are just fumbling around in the dark when it comes to learning how to build influence with people. We have this false idea of what leadership is. We think about it like, hey, if I'm the captain of the football team, if I'm the boss of the team, I'm a leader. But if you've ever worked for a bad boss, you recognize that just because you got the job title doesn't mean you've got the behavior to learn how to influence. So there's key skills within this umbrella of leadership. Like, how do you build trust? How do you demonstrate accountability? How do you have really difficult conversations that preserve the relationship? So those are the types of skills that I get really excited about when people want to commit to growing their personal leadership skills.
That's fascinating because 30% of leadership is innate, you're saying, and 70% is learned. And is that developed through active kind of leadership courses? Is that developed through extracurricular type activities? Is that developed in childhood and adolescence? Or how and when does that leadership best develop?
I would say yes to all those things. I'd be more curious about you when you think about your leadership abilities. Where do you think that you learn them the most?
It's a great question. I think adversity is one of the best teachers of leadership, provided that you can lead yourself out of it.
Hmm.
So that's one of the reasons I created this podcast, being from crisis to justice. So this idea of everyone at some point has to face one or more crises, and ultimately it's their ability to navigate out of those and create meaning about that crisis or those crises that help shape who we are as a person. So ultimately, I don't think that anybody can become a leader without some sort of adversity first. So that is the stepping stone or the entryway into the path of leadership. So let me stop there.
I
If you
No, I think so too. I think that's when your character is tested most, and you think about building influence and leading your own life first. Having that sense of character is great. So it's easy for me to say that I'm an honest and trustworthy person. But if I can do that on a really good day, I can be honest and trustworthy. That doesn't really matter though. What if my back is against the wall and I'm in a lot of trouble? Am I going to really adhere to those behaviors? And I think that's the mark in which we get tested through adversity. And you're right. I think how we navigate through really challenging, difficult times says a lot about our character. And I think more importantly, our capacity. Like you think about somebody who grows through their career, who can just ultimately take on more because they know how to deal with the level of stress, the level of challenge, and they get perspective. Like, oh, this is not a big deal. We can do this.
hmm And do you think it should be gradual increases and those are the best way to develop leadership? Or do you believe in somebody being thrown or jumping into the deep end and then figuring it out?
Which is like a recipe for disaster. Like in a perfect world, right? It would constantly be two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back. So we can have a little bit of adversity, so we can do some safe fails in our life. But this is not a perfect world that we live in. And the hard part is, I was talking to an author the other day who just talks about disrupting yourself. The reality is that we're creatures of comfort. Why am I gonna, if life is pretty good, why am I gonna go out looking for problems? So I can just test myself, but inevitably crisis finds us. And so, or we get like a health scare or something like that we have to deal. Like inevitably we're all going to deal with sad news, disappointment, and crisis. It's really, what stage of life is it going to find you? And so I always challenge people, certainly don't go looking for trouble. But if you find yourself too comfortable, maybe you're not stretching hard enough. And I ask people all the time, what do you learn more from, your failures or successes? And people always raise their hand and say failures. I learn more from my failures and successes. Now, the goal isn't go fail more. The goal is don't be afraid and get a little bit uncomfortable from time to time, like push yourself a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think the intention is to fail, but the idea is you should be comfortable with yourself that you'll figure it out regardless of what happens. Is that the right idea or no?
Self-trust, self-reliance, it's like building that muscle that you can really count on yourself and get to the position where you make good decisions. I think ultimately, when I think about my Marine Corps training, what did our conversations and instructions center on? It was, how do you make good decisions in crisis? And
Mm-hmm.
they gave us really powerful visual that they're like, okay, imagine you're a car driving down a highway. And what's going to keep you on the road are these two guardrails. And one of these guardrails represents your values or your organization values. And that's going to keep you safe. So one guardrail are your values. The other side is the law and policies and rules of engagement. So if you can make your decisions that mind your values and then also mind the law, you're going to find yourself in a good path. But you got to keep making decisions to move forward. So I use that all the time when I think about like when I don't know, because most people, when they're in crisis, are in situations they've never been in before. And so they just don't know. But using that as a wonderful, I think, visual for how do I get myself out of here is really, it's just great and useful.
Mm-hmm. And so, how does one figure out their values? Do they sit down with a pad and paper and think about what are my values, or what is that
Yeah.
process like?
So in the Marine Corps, they were great. They're like, okay, here are your values: honor, courage, and commitment. And so they made it pretty easy for us. But then, yeah, as an adult, and your values change. I mean, in my 20s, independence and freedom were really important to me. Now in my 40s, I have kids, and I think about security um, and happiness, like different values for different stages in our career. But I would always advise you, yes. And it's nothing that you can do like, I'm going to block out Tuesday from 2 to 3. I'm going to focus on writing my values. Great, that's a start. But I think it's a starting in the process of making sure that we really identify what is most important to us. And I've never met anybody who has regretted making a decision when they consulted their values. That's not because it was an easy decision, it was just what they had to do. It's like their North Star.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that leadership has any core values in common? Good
I'd like,
leadership.
yeah, I would like to think integrity. I think that's integrity because that's going to be the gateway to trust. And I feel like your personal integrity is your gateway to self trust. If I can trust myself, I can be a trustworthy person. Therefore, I can at least ask and you can count that you'll be able to trust me. So I think that integrity is one of those core values. Trust is accountability, personal accountability. I think many of us kind of bastardize that word a little bit. We think that accountability is something that's going to happen to us. But in reality, being able to say, I'm sorry and I was wrong and leading with accountability is the best expression of accountability. I would rather admit I was wrong than being held accountable to a situation. I feel like I'm more on the offense of that situation. So I definitely do believe that those are some of the core fundamentals.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love that. Those are, you named two of my firm's core values. One is integrity, the other is accountability. Then we have growth, we have value, commitment, and service to our clients, and ultimately results in dependability, the dependability of your team members and teammates with you as well. Because without those things, I think that any team is really lost. Let me ask you this: when it comes to integrity, here's one of the hardest ones I think when it
Mhm.
comes to leadership. Is I think there's a big part of leadership that is having that integrity, having that candor, having that honesty with yourself and your team. And then there's also another component of it that even with setbacks, in the face of setbacks, that you remain steadfast and certain that you're going to get there, even if the path is flexible, the result and the goal is not. So, could you talk a little bit about how those align or square?
Yes, well, first, I always think that the plan, right, is a reference point for change. So it's great always to have a plan when you're in crisis, but recognize it's not going to survive, as we would say in the Marine Corps, first contact from the enemy, because that's just life. Like you have plans all the time and they just don't work out, but starting with a really good plan. But, with your question about integrity, I just think about moments in my life when I've been in crisis. I have this moment where I say, how do I want to get out of this? Like what do I want to be success on the other side of this mess that I found myself in? Like, I think about I went through a divorce and, in the process, I thought, okay, on the other side of this, what is in my best interest? My relationship with my kids, my it's in my best interest that even though I don't like my husband right now, it's really in my best interest that he has a really great relationship with his kids, that he is a solid, successful person, because that could cause so much damage down the road. So again, kids, him, me. And I think sometimes it's okay. So how must I act to get to that? And I think that that helps drive a lot of your behavioral decisions. And that's to me when you can keep integrity with yourself and you hold yourself accountable to an outcome. So I think, if you're listening to this and you're finding yourself in a mess right now, I mean, whoever has a perfect life? Nobody. There's always going to be something nitpicking in the background. So just ask yourself, like, how do I want to get out of this? What do I want to have intact? Okay, now what are the behaviors that are going to get me there? And how do those jive with my values? And where might they not jive? What conflict do I anticipate in the process of it? Like, what bad else could happen? And kind of play it out. Like, how am I going to respond when this does happen? Because I think sometimes when we're in crisis, our hunker down and get quiet and get small can really cloud our judgment. So sometimes thinking about the future outcome can be a really great guide for us.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting because my office, obviously dealing with a lot of business disputes, partnership disputes, litigation, that a lot of times is a client's first reaction when it comes to a lawsuit is to contract or to shrink, like you were talking about. I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but a lot of times the right decision is really expansion and growth to help sustain yourself, your message, your business while undergoing this adversity. And so let me ask you this. I mean, where does one find that strength?
Well, it's not wine or any of your vices that you go to. So don't do that. For me personally, I think it's life experience. I have this really great file in the back of my mind that reminds me of the times I've felt this way before and what I did to get out of it. And so I think a really healthy exercise for you, anyone listening, is think about just some of your track record of your troubles and how you overcame them, because that's going to help you feel more confident and it's going to help override that instinct to contract. So I don't want to say that you have like a failure hit list in your mind, but maybe it's better to call it like have a resiliency hit list, because you've been in this position before. Maybe it wasn't as significant or severe, but those behaviors are going to lead you out of it. So I would start with that. Like resiliency comes from that. I cannot say though, if you are in crisis, like do not neglect your sleep. I think you have one of these too on your fingers. You have an Aura ring.
I do, yes.
Yeah, I notice that when I get 8 hours of really solid, when I get that A- in the morning and I've got a great sleep score, I am better prepared for stress. So you really do have to take care of you. The psychological impact of a stressful situation just bears deep within your body. And I would say walk. If you really want to clear your mind, get outside, because the answer and the solution isn't going to come as you ruminate and fret and just, create something bigger. I always think too, like there's three lenses that I like to advocate for people to think about too when they feel like the pressure is so big. The first lens is, if you were a kind friend, how would you, the reverse lens, how would you talk to yourself in this situation? What would you tell yourself? The second lens is, take the wide lens. How big of a deal is this in the course of everything else going on in the world right now? And then the long lens, in 3 years from now, how are you going to feel about this situation? Are we going to laugh about it? Are we going to, think about it? And so if you can do that trick, you can help reframe too the magnitude that you think the crisis that you're in.
I love that. So let me ask you this then. So there are a number of great leaders that we can think of that have accomplished great things, but maybe in their personal lives, they weren't the best of people. They weren't the best leaders of themselves in a way, despite the fact that outside of their personal lives, they created great results. So in a way, they were great leaders of others, despite their personal failings. So do you have any thoughts on why sometimes it's easier to lead others than to lead oneself?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's hard to have self-confrontation, but I also think, why do good people do bad things? It's because they don't have their values connected to them. They have values, but they haven't revisited them in a very long time. And they lose sight of the person that they want to be in those moments. It is so easy to be busy. I think nobody has a problem being too busy. The hard part is slowing down and really reflecting, which is why with the work that I do executive coaching. And you would think, oh, business strategy, getting people to lead through change. Yeah, all that is fine. But one of the hardest leadership relationships that we have is the one with ourselves. And so getting to know your authentic leadership style, really understanding your values, really pulling from within you these strengths that have just been pushed down and are within you, but they haven't had their moment in the sunshine yet. That's the type of work that I really enjoy doing, because that's when you see people really step into their potential, when they're more comfortable and confident in their own skin. So yes, there's some people who are just incredibly charismatic, really good with people. Their life in the background is kind of a drama show. And it's often just that disconnect from their best intentions of who they want to be.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned leadership style. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that means? Are there like specific terms that connote different kinds of styles? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, there's a lot of work, right? There's like the big five that if you Google it, you can take a test right now to get a sense of where you stand with, empathy interaction and all these great things. There's DISC, there's Myers-Briggs, like there's so many different assessments that you can get to really understand your communication style, your preferences, how you deal with conflict, how you manage stress. So there's that. There's also, again, if you Google right now, like 6 different types of leaders, you're going to find that there's, a champion, a challenger, an advocate. Like there's all different things. And I would say this, like before you go there looking at all the external knowledge, consult yourself first and really think about who you are at your core. What are your strengths that you were given? What are some of your limitations? So do the homework on you and then go take the assessments. Those are always fun learning too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, is there a way that you suggest that leaders get to understand or know themselves best? Is that meditation? Is that a silent retreat? Is that
What do you do?
coach course?
How have you
What
grown and developed as a leader?
I have grown and developed as a leader, I think, based on I'm an avid believer in real results and feedback. I mean, I think that there really is no substitute from adversity, facing the adversity to the result that you get, and then adjusting or course correcting. So uh, ultimately, I look at, okay, what was the action, what was the result, and then I just analyze it. I think that's just how my mind works, and so I'll go back and look at, could I have said this differently? Should I have said this differently? Was my inflection on a certain word or phrase said in a certain way that could have been misinterpreted? What was the context? So I'll go back and review the mental game tape, if you will, about what happened and like what actually happened in that moment and then what the result was. And I just assess things that way. It's really the only way I know how. So I just keep using that.
I think that reflection and feedback and self-analysis and candor are all great ways for me personally too. Like in addition to those, I do walk a lot. I spend a lot of time in my own mind. I do have behind me, it's kind of hysterical, it's like a dog bed and it's my mindfulness meditation mat. So I do spend time meditating too, just to kind of clear my mind. I try to read more on my phone than engage in social media. And I think that that's where I know I grow and develop is I spend more time thinking about what thoughts are mine versus what are thoughts that have been given to me. And that helps me get a little bit more clarity on how I show up in this world.
Mm. Yeah, many times. I mean, how easy is it for you to distinguish original thoughts of yours versus something somebody said to you, especially when those things maybe have seeped in from childhood or something you didn't even notice. The TV was on one day and somehow got slipped into your subconscious, or it's just not clear to you how it came in. And this seems like your thought, but maybe it's not.
Well, think about it. Like I'm sure somebody on this listening to this podcast heard at some stage in their life that they were bad at math and they just took that as that grain of salt and they just adopted it as part of their DNA. But it's probably not true. Like I was once told I was bad at math. And the reality was that when I went to grad school, I discovered I wasn't bad at math. I was slow at math and how different my life would have been had I realized that, Angie, you're just impatient. And that's why you're slow at math. I probably had you taken those courses and you gave it a little bit more time, you would have done more successfully at math. It's imagining, it's like reimagining that a lot of the truths that we hold about ourselves aren't those ideas that we've authored. They've just been given to us.
And then having the self accountability or self candor to be able to say, look, it's maybe that I'm not slow or bad at math, or it could just be, look, I just don't like math and I don't really want to deal with it. And maybe that's okay for whatever your
Yeah.
chosen path is.
Yes, being slow at math has not slowed me down in life, but it was a real aha moment for me to know that, the things that we tell ourselves. And, going back to like this crisis and justice theme that you're talking about, I think about, when people find themselves in really difficult situations, there's a lot of things like we turn on that self-doubt and, how we can't get through it. Like, I can't do this, I can't do that, this isn't going to happen. And also, we have this switch that turns on to binary thinking. Like I can only do this or this in the situation, that we fail to see possibility and opportunity. It's just kind of amazing when we are stressed and stretched as humans, how many limitations just come crawling into our thinking when it comes to making decisions to get us out of it. And so I think about those things too. Like, again, if you need to find yourself to a better situation, just know that your thinking might be holding you back.
100%. And so, on that note, if you could give the listeners a piece of advice on their journey towards becoming great leaders, if you had to impart one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, my last book was called Bet on You, and it was all about taking risks in your life. So we do manage risk in our business, and please manage risk in your business. But when it comes to your dreams and your goals, lead with risk. There is so much about risk that we don't know or we're misinformed about. Like, we think about risk being the opposite of reward, but the reality is that any good thing that has ever happened to you in life has been because you took a chance on you bet on yourself, and it paid off. And so as you think about the position that you're in right now, what got you here is you've taken a lot of risks. You might be telling yourself, I'm risk averse, but really rethink that for a second. You've taken a lot of risks. What's going to get you further is more risk. So lean into that skill set for yourself. And part of that too is I think about the positions that I find myself in, like what often, and I'm at a crisis situation or if I'm in a bad position in my life, I do want to hunker down and play it small. Like, I don't want to really take any risks at all, but it's actually the skill set that you need to lean into to get yourself out of it. And so really think about how you're going to be taking risks and how you're thinking about risks, and perhaps how you can reframe it to use that skill set to help you in a situation.
I love that. Yeah, and I agree with that, because it's only through the risk that you can really also risk growing. I mean, without risk, you don't really have a true opportunity for the reward, which includes not only financial rewards but also personal growth and the ability to navigate additional crises or problems even better.
100%.
So, Angie, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of this today. So if they wanted to find more information about you, find more information about potentially getting some executive coaching towards leadership, where can they find you?
So they can go to angieconnect.com, and that is where I host my blog, my Bet on You podcast, and a ton of other resources too. I've got a lot of free e-courses that are available to you, so check it out. And I have my my weekly newsletter that's called Rally Cry that you can sign up for.
Awesome. Go check it out, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining me today. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you know when the next podcast episode is dropping, so you can hear from incredible guests like Angie and others. Angie, thank you again for joining us today and imparting some of much of the wisdom that you have.
Thank you for having me. So enjoy the conversation.